And it's recording.
Nice. Yeah, then welcome everybody to the WAX OIG Roundtable Edition 3. Today is August 15th. And we kind of have a short agenda with a few topics that have been discussed in public chats in the past 2 weeks. Obviously, OIG was in vacation mode the past 2 weeks, so we don't have a large update on the backlog for you. But I need to mention the OIG timeline. So the snapshot for the technical evaluation is being taken at the end of day, I think, August 20th. And you know how it works. You don't have to do anything for it. So maybe we can start with the first topic. I reordered it the wrong way, which is producer transaction counts, because we've seen a few debates about this topic, and maybe Anders can sum up what has been discussed in the past week in the Guild's private channel, or your observations in terms of producer transaction count.
Yeah, there has been a bunch of different issues, and there are a few producers that have had a lot of empty blocks. We are one of those that have had most over the past 2-3 weeks or something. It has been going up and down, and we have been monitoring our own blocks. We have been monitoring others, and we can see that even though we currently have the most empty blocks, we have more CPU, average CPU per round than most producers, meaning that we still have a lot of transactions and is more CPU used in ours than in others, and that can be for many reasons. And that's been one of the discussions where we have moved producer 3 times in the last 2 weeks to different machines. And currently we have a machine that is a little bit slower than the one we had before, which means that we are billing a little bit more than what some other producers do. But even with that, we are still, in total, we have more CPU in transactions than average, which means the middle of the guild. So there are people below and people above. So even though we have a lot of empty blocks, we still produce a lot of transactions in our round. And we have a few theories for why, and none of them are fully validated yet. Some of the ideas have been disproven, but we are also working on a few different optimizations at once. We are changing configurations, and we are working on peering and networking, and we are testing some of the new features in Antelope, and we are actively observing and working on this. And we have been talking to other guilds which has been in the same situation, and yeah, there's a lot of work in the background, and I don't think this is how it should be. I think there is something wrong. We haven't figured out exactly what. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
So when you say there's something wrong, while you were researching, did you acknowledge any issues with receiving blocks from other guilds or receiving transactions?
Latency to other guilds is fine. There's no issue there. We don't see any periods where our latency goes up, which means that we don't see any network issues in that way. We have a few theories, and we don't know exactly which layer it can be. We see transactions coming from both our transaction peers and from other transaction peers. We haven't digested yet why we are experiencing more empty blocks than other teams. If that is some settings that we have or some settings that other people have. We don't know if other teams are blacklisting something that we are not, which means that we might get some heavier transactions that they are not processing, or if it's yeah, there can be a bunch of different reasons. Let's say that the 5 producers before us has something blacklisted, that we don't have, meaning that those transactions build up in a queue, and when they come to us, we have to process this. And if that is very delayed, that could mean that the first blocks from us, sometimes we will have a lot of transactions to go through in the first, second, third, fourth block, or just the first one, which means that we don't have time to put those in, but then we have a large queue, and when they reach the different limits, then we go through the other one, and we fill the remaining blocks with more CPU build transactions on average than the lower half of the board. That is one of the theories, but it's a little bit hard to validate unless we go and break down all the contracts that every producer before us is validating and not. And then, there's a bunch of things, and we are actively working on and investigating this, not only for our purpose, but for the chain itself.
Thank you for this summary. As you just mentioned, you occasionally see empty blocks on other producers also. Those show up in the graph, but for example, the past 7 days, it was mainly your producer with empty rounds, it seems. So how do you come to the conclusion that some of the guilds might or might not have many empty blocks while they're producing?
We have not come to conclusions. We have come to theories, and we are trying to break them down and removing which theory it is not. And we have seen guilds that have everything from 0 missed rounds in 24 missed blocks, not missed rounds, missed blocks in 24 hours, up to 1,000 blocks missed in 24 hours. And some teams most teams are below 50 empty blocks in a day. So having 1,000 is surely an outliner, and it can be for, as I said, many reasons, and it is hard to say exactly why. I know that one potential issue is that a lot of teams put a limit on how large transactions they will put into a block. So if a transaction is larger than that, they will ignore it, and our limit is higher. Potentially, that is one of the reasons why we get a lot of empty blocks, because we have a high limit, and we start to look at it and it fails, start to look at another one and it fails, which other might invalidate directly. And that is one of the theories, but yeah, there's a lot of them. And most of this investigation has been done by Eric and Joachim in our team, and not by me, but I'm into the discussions, of course.
Okay, I understand. So that means by setting a high CPU execution time on your producer specifically, you would allow large transactions to go through while others would just reject them. Those, it wouldn't show in the average CPU per round, for example, because they just prefer to produce the smaller blocks and transactions.
Yeah, like allowing large transactions has been a big issue on EOS in the past, where only a few producers were able to produce the big MSIG updates. I believe Nation was one of the few that actually was able to push that. So those that wanted to push the large transactions actually need to time it on depending on which producer was producing. And that has not really been an issue on Wax. As far as I know, but I know there's been talks about it for multiple chains, and I can't remember exactly which of them. I know FIO had issues with that before as well, both on API and on producer side.
If I recall correctly, there are some guilds that cannot process transactions even when they are within the chain limits. So they're blocking them on the API side or on the producer side, and this transaction just failed. So this is definitely something we should look into, so that all producers should be able to at least sign transactions that align with the minimum specifications we have set in the OZO system settings.
When that brings up, I was going to mention, because before, I don't know what it's last 7 days, I think it was last week, I was working with Dimitri over at Bounty Block, because there were several guilds that were kind of getting reported as, not all 10 or 12, whatever, but there were empty blocks. And so we were kind of playing with some of the settings and looking through the logs. And ultimately it was because, 1, 2, or 3 accounts would jam things up, and that whole snowball effect of why you give up and send on an empty block that causes it to begin with. And we found it looked like some better results by bumping up the new subjective billing settings to, instead of only review block by block by block by block, to have a further penalty window, so to say, right? That it would tally them between all of the blocks. And what we ended up trying out, and looked like it was better, was having a subjective bill window of 6 blocks and really dropping the subjective billing aggressiveness to, if you failed it after, I think it was 1 transaction, we got it down to, because 3 is the default, 3 strikes, you're out. So we went a little bit lower and then extended it out to where if you got subjectively billed in the first block, it ignored you for blocks 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And that same account couldn't at least crush out every block in the round. The default subjective billing settings would do that. But what that's going to mean is, like Anders was saying, is you're going to have a lot of BPs, not because they're intentionally blacklisting, so to say, a contract, but even just the subjective billings, is that the aggressors are going to trigger those protective measures, which is going to snowball them to the next person who may or may not, so kind of what Anders is talking about. I mean, just some of the recommended fixes right now, it did seem to help with, I haven't applied it on ours to these settings, but to use those 2 new settings to kind of try to protect your round the best you could. My thought was you at least got 2 chances, 2 strikes, and you're out of the entire round. You could screw the first block, you could screw the 7th block. Now, you've got multiple accounts doing it, so the problem is still if one set wrecks the first one and another set wrecks the second one, but eventually, hopefully, you would still be able to at least process some transactions in rounds. Those look like they're 10 and 11 round of empty. I mean, the entire round was crushed. Do y'all do any of the new subjective billing windows?
Yeah, we have both of those, and we have tweaked those settings, and we have also tweaked the peers and everything. And one thing that I have seen in discussions is that max transaction time in milliseconds that guilds set, that is usually around 30 to 40 milliseconds for a lot of teams. I don't know if all teams do that, but that is, ours is currently at 180, I believe. So if most teams are at 30 to 40 milliseconds and ours is at 180, all the big transactions will be ignored by other teams and will be pushed to us. And other teams. I'm sure we are not the only ones that have the larger number, and it's the only way to figure out what other teams have is really to ask them, and then you need to talk to everyone.
Some guidance, and that's some of the things. I think max transaction window, along with the read-only window with 4.0, those are kind of, and our nodes, we're having to go back and change, because I mean, I had some of them that not on wax, but they were like 1,000. I mean, they were just through the roof, because if it didn't have enough time, it would fail it. So we just set them high enough to just deal with it. But what we're finding, and I think it came from an ENF recommendation or somewhere, that it was 151, and then whatever the read window is to go along with it, like 165,000 or something in microseconds. But to provide I mean, every BP is able to do whatever they want to do. Maybe they need to do 180 if they want to, but to provide those recommended settings to all the BPs versus trying, I just venture to say that most of them probably don't, like Sweden, intentionally set it to something. They probably either don't set it, which is the default of 30, which is exceptionally low, I think. Or
I'm not sure that every team needs to have the same either.
Not sure.
There are reasons for having a lower limit, because you can, in theory, push more transactions into a block. I mean, most transactions won't reach that limit anyway. Majority of transactions are very small. They are transfers or actions.
But I'd also argue that's an inconsistent user experience across the board. Yeah. I mean, as BPs, I think we need to try to make the consistency between us all the best we can. I mean, don't open us up to, you know, a vulnerability, but
yeah.
And also worth mentioning before we move on, this might not even be the reason. It's just a theory.
I see.
Well, we can test that though. I mean, I'm happy to set mine to 180 milliseconds. What did you set yours to? That's very high.
Yeah, it's 180. It's from the old EOS times.
On some nodes. I literally had 1,000 that I had
we
copied
can
and pasted.
I mean, I'm happy to do that if the OIG don't mind if something goes awry. But I can do that right now. We can see if something happens. I'll just quickly knock it up to 180. I'll just set it 50 milliseconds. That's kind of like our standard that we set it at. 50 milliseconds and 61,000, right?
I personally also wanted to test lower, but like there is the benefit of having producers that actually take care of the big transactions is important. But
sure,
if this is the reason why we see a lot of empty blocks, we don't know. If that is the case, then that is the next step to investigate why that is happening and what can be done about it. First, we need to figure out.
I'm happy to up ours. I'm happy to up ours if we all agree that I'm going to be doing a test here. I'll up it and we'll see if we get empty blocks.
Yeah, that would be cool. And I'm tracking. Well, we are tracking how many blocks each producer is missing each hour and each 24 hour, and we have that as a message to Telegram, so we get this information.
Ross,
which anyone can sign up to very soon, by the way.
I'll do it right now if we all game on. So.
Yeah, you're good to go for the
if
next
I drop a few blocks. Hey, it's 12:30 at night here, so it's not like I'm going to be able to stay up testing for hours, but I'll certainly do it and we'll see if something happens. But like Michael said, he had it set at 1,000.
I don't know if it was on the Wax BP node, but I just know because 4.0 has caused us to have to, I had to put the read-only window in there. Well, that then had to match the setting with max window. And because they were astronomical, it was like, no, sir, you can't do that. So
what is your read window size? So I don't break it.
I currently,
if they don't match,
this machine can't reach that node, so I can get back to you after this meeting, and I can figure out our settings for you.
So since we gathered a few BPs today, if you could look up what your CPU transaction time is set to.
I can give you ours because that's what I'm kind of standardizing. The read window of 165,000. And then the max transaction time of 151. And that came, I think, from like ENF was presenting it as options for jungle or something. But they thought that might be a decent round number. But yeah, everybody's entitled to their own.
But do you have any missing, empty blocks?
A few. I haven't looked at, but not quite like
28 in the last 24 hours.
Yeah. So
what am I in the last 25?
I just need to find you in the list. You might not even be in the list, which means that you have 0.
I think Sphere was one of those that.
No, I think you have nothing in the last 24 hours.
Yeah.
There's 0 empty blocks.
Okay. And you wouldn't see it there, Brad. You'd see it on Nation's graph. It's not missing rounds. The blocks are all getting signed. Like I say, the block producer is doing its job. It's just not getting anything in that block. And it's getting it out on time because it's not forking out. It's just empty. Now, 1 or 2 empty blocks, I don't know if we'll ever, in all fairness, be able to get out of all of them because of the way subjective billing kind of works. It's reactive, not preventative. You've got to do something wrong to get put on the naughty list to then keep from doing something wrong. So
yours is very consistent, Anders. It's very consistently full of empty blocks.
Yes,
and I think that max transaction time might just be a.
It could be. Some rounds we have no empty blocks. Some rounds we have one. That's most. But then we have some where multiple of the first blocks are empty.
Because
But-
if it was the transaction time, then Michael should have it as well, because he's also got a very high one. He's only a few milliseconds short of you.
Just for the sake of the reference of that graph, I don't have that extended subjective billing. I'd be curious what Bounty Blocks is. We said it last week, and he was getting 4 or 6 empty blocks per round, kind of like these random you see on a lot of us. And the subjective billing, I think, tended to help his out. But I mean, Sweden's just got something different going on. I don't know what the hell it is.
Yeah.
I really don't.
Just for understanding, because it seems strange with having a large CPU execution time, blocks shouldn't be empty, right? Because you can process a lot of transactions.
Well, you could
Or
have
any
one transaction chew up the whole 180 milliseconds. You know,
Okay,
and
I got you.
I mean, in theory, but I mean, I'm running 151, so it
So
It can also lead to you ending up with big transactions that then fail, and that way blocking the entire block.
I see. Okay,
That's also a way to see it. Yeah.
so it goes.
Yeah, that's
through
what I
the
tried to say
API,
before.
but doesn't get produced on the producer finally.
yeah, but if
Same
it
what
was
we saw
too
with
big,
this.
it wouldn't get validated and it would get forked, right? So it would be a fork, which would be missed blocks, not empty blocks. These are
No. It's transactions that bypass the APIs that go through on the API, and then it's big blocks. So most other DPs just block them off, and some have them through, and then these guilds have them specifically in their backlog to validate. Just the ones with a big transaction time, and then there they fail on the producer, and that's why potentially Sweden has the abundancy of huge missing blocks.
Yeah, it's a theory at least.
Empty blocks, I mean.
But we have had this limit for a long time, and this issue started recently, and we haven't changed anything when it started.
Yeah, but it could
There's-
just be somebody deciding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Doing some stupid.
There's
There's
this
been a lot
this
of-
one
been a lot of
arbitrage
people.
contract that is
Yeah.
pushing a lot of transactions that then fail. And he's using multiple accounts now. I think he increased the number of accounts. So maybe through this round robin, he's circumventing the subjective billing, and that's why we see more of these transactions and blocks fail.
When the way subjective billing works is every round, I mean, unless you have a subjective window of like 5 minutes, every single block producer is a fresh game to
Yeah.
play because those stats aren't shared. So as soon as he gets put on my naughty list, as soon as I hand over to Rio, immediately they're able to do the exact same thing to Rio's. Now, maybe different nodes, different results, but you know, the way subjective billing works is it does kind of set you up and even from round to round. Like if you break me one round, I'm gonna let you do it again next round and let you do it again next round, you know. So interesting, I saw that there are some networks that are playing around with adding billing for failed transactions. So
We actually spoke about that a year ago in the roundtable, the node roundtable. Yeah.
but like I say,
There are
I-
some potential risk with that as well, but yeah.
I get it. That's not a perfect answer, but that's I just wanted to throw it out. To me, I was like, interesting. I'm curious to see how it works. I mean, you know, all the different chains have tried different things, but you know, FIO doesn't have that problem because they bill per transaction.
It's the
Well.
cycle. Hey, you keep going back. Whoa, just charging for it.
If you make it cost, people don't. I mean, if it's a free service that's useful, they're going to abuse it to the point that it's not. You know, I think of a
Yeah.
stand that said that. Anyway, Anders, obviously we're here to anything we can play and tweak and try and whatever. I'd love to break things. Let me know. Happy to.
So you keep reminding us.
Yes.
At least what is
remind-
clear
I'll
is
remind you in your alerts.
what's clear is that we are not ignoring this. We're on top of it. We are monitoring and tweaking
Yeah.
things and seeing what is happening.
Do you see
They're
any
finding
concern?
blocks.
Do you see any concern with collecting information about the producer configuration publicly?
maybe, I mean, you're talking about like sharing general settings that we all have.
Yeah.
I would say no, none of them immediately.
Would
come
have to
mind.
think about that, but probably not.
Yeah. And it'll, yeah.
There are some edge cases where that would be an issue, potentially, for abusers to know which rules they should play by to get around it. Pretty much what some contracts do, like the arbitrage contract. They figure out how a lot of things work and how to try to get around it. So the more information they have, the easier it is.
But if you said to me, Anders, you said to me, "Can I just see your BP config?" I would just take out my key and send you my config. Right?
Yeah, same.
Peer to peer is no problem.
Yeah, if we print it publicly, that's what I'm meaning. I don't know what would have to think about that way more before I say yes or no on that risk.
Okay, then I'll bother you again with that. But we might collect this piece of information for the next evaluation to see what could possibly be wrongly configured.
You know, Nation put their configs on their GitHub, you know, like their base configs. They actually just publish them up there. Yeah, somewhere in the rabbit warren of their GitHub, but it's definitely there somewhere.
BP config, block producer configuration. Yeah.
There we go. Yeah. So I suppose that is older. Yeah.
That's for the transactions entry. I think nothing sensible in there. And then the block producer. This is the interesting part. So this is what we might want to collect, right?
Yeah.
Except
just check what date that was. Obviously version 4 10 months ago.
Yeah.
So presumably he's got another one that's kind of sanitized for it as well.
Okay, then let's check if this contains any sensible information, and we should probably collect this piece of info.
Max transaction time 35 he's got there. Huh? I wonder if that's what they're actually running.
On EOS, I know that they were one of the few that produced the big M6.
Sorry, I'm back. What'd I miss?
We're looking at Nation's default config that's on there.
So yeah, I've been going through some of these. GrayMass also has one out in their Docker images for a default config, but they haven't been updated to the 4.0 settings. I don't think. Like that's the old subjective billing.
Yeah, this is the old one. Yeah.
Correct. Whereas the new one allows you to do longer windows and earlier strikeouts and stuff like that, as well as from the API side, there's many missing transaction status, transaction retry, account queries, stuff like that. Not bare minimum, but you should probably know to put those in. You have to add them. Anyway, so that's where I get back to the standard config option.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks for helping out. Anything to add to the empty blocks causa for now?
How do they get you know that view that Matthew puts in the channel where it actually shows the average, minimum, maximum, and average transactions? Because if you go, I can't actually get that view. It's under average transactions per round. He's got like even
he does have some stuff that may not be public. I know. I mean,
well,
it's on one of them.
It's the same data, but it's got a different summary of average.
Correct. I've asked that same thing. Is how do I get that? And he's like, oh, it's on a private board. It's there.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there's no public way.
Maybe he'll give us admin access.
Okay,
He probably would
then
give you access to it if you said just give me access to it. He probably would.
Anybody else? Yes, not me.
Or you'll break it for everybody. Huh?
I would. It's a talent.
Mhm.
Anyway, yeah, I mean, I would say for anybody who's interested, we're all paying attention to it. It's weird. We're chasing it.
Are you all running version 4?
no. I think like 2/3 of the network is, but I've definitely seen people not running 404. Is actually your Grafana dashboard up to date, Michael? Showing the versions of?
It would be,
Overnight.
but it's only what the API responds. So
Yeah, that's the outside. Yeah.
you can get a general idea, but if you want to know what the VP's running, you would absolutely have to ask. Or we could run that heartbeat plugin that everybody says.
We never run all nodes on the same version.
Correct. And you can ask Sweden their get info, and that comes from a different server than the actual API is even. So they're the epitome of don't always trust it. You can get a general idea. It's a good indicator if it's really old, but you'd have to ask explicitly on what VP.
Yeah.
Anything about it. You're supposed to be hidden.
Well, we running 404 on our BP now.
We're 404 across the board on all of ours as well.
Is your ship? Are your ships 404?
I did.
Oh, I'm too scared, bro.
I did. I ran one for a week or two, and it seemed fine. It fed Atomic and Hyperion, so I said, "All right,
That's all that matters." Okay.
404, here we go, baby." So it's on all my
good.
chains. All of them are 404, unless they have custom binary.
We still using the patched 315 for ship because I'm just petrified of breaking our 28 terabyte database for Wax full history.
Yeah, the last search. Yeah, like I say, I just have enough nodes that hopefully if one breaks, the others don't.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, though, I am syncing an EO state history from scratch. Have been for the last, I don't know, month and a half. And it's similar. It's about similar to working on Wax, with that load that's coming in. And it's definitely found some bugs and things that we fixed. Hey, there's Dimitri. I was just talking about you.
EOS has got like loads more transactions.
I'm in the EDO.
A year ago, like 2 years ago, whatever. Now, it's not as many transactions anymore.
Yeah, I'm still in the EDOS days of 2020, so it's yeah.
Is anyone in here running anything else than 404 on producer or older versions? Nobody, right?
Dimitri was until I think he just upgraded last week. Whenever Dimitri, you were running 3.1 something, and then you just upgraded to 4.0 when we were working on it last week, right?
Yeah, I updated the so guys, I updated the BP and BP and recently a few days ago one of the peers, the close peers to the BP. That's about it. We still have the API and other stuff on 3.1 hotfix.
Cool.
Nice. Okay, then let's conclude this topic. Let's see what we can find out until the next roundtable in 2 weeks and pick up the same topic again.
Cool.
We are still a bit riddled if we should force the 404 update until the next full evaluation or not. Many people are on vacation. We're not sure if we can have the whole network upgraded by then, but it will surely come. So
what would be the purpose of forcing that?
Mainly new API features being available, like the get transaction status API and some other smaller features that are included in 404 and not in 3. So to make use of those features, like the get transaction status API, we should be moving the whole network to version 4 as soon as possible.
I think that's a good idea, but I think you should give teams more than 2 weeks.
Yeah, probably we won't do it this time around. I think we decided also to not do it, but I feel the urgency to do it as soon as possible.
Yeah.
So another topic. So this leads to the other topic. We got some API features being introduced with the new version, and we currently don't have the validations for those API features. Like we don't actively monitor those features. We just look for uptime. What's your opinion on this? Because we've seen some chain APIs and some other API features fail occasionally on some guilds, but we also see that they are increasingly important, and we should start monitoring those endpoints and their functionality and make sure that they are working. Any input on this from your side? Any observations you want to share?
Everyone should have account queries and full blocks on their chain API nodes.
Sure. For example, this is something that needs to be validated. Yeah.
Yeah. We probably need a list. We need a list of these are the specific queries that need to be supported. Boom, 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 boom.
Yeah.
And that way it's easy to measure against them.
Yes, but you also, because some of these, kind of like block logs, you have the options of, do you have it all? How long do you have it? Like, even as we're going through like transaction status, there are some default settings. Like if you look in the gray mass INI, and it's got a little comment that it retains transaction statuses for up to an hour. So you need to provide not only, hey, you need to turn it on, you didn't know that, but unlike account queries, which is just an on or off Boolean, there's actually settings that need to be minimum set to turn it on and potentially standardized to where if you're going to expect that they're on every public API, that your experience would be at least, right? If you maintain an hour, then fine if you maintain 12, but you don't need to do less than an hour's worth of transaction or whatever it's decided on. And then, yes, validating those types of things.
Yeah, as I understood, it's fully configurable. So you can either set to 1 hour or 1 day or 1 month. But it's huge in size, I think, if you retain a lot of data.
From what it looked like, I mean, and I hadn't had a chance to really check the size of the database because I've really just been rolling it out. But Aaron had a 1 gig retention for transaction history, and it was keeping up to 1 hour worth of whatever. So if it's 1 gig for 1 hour, I was like, that's small enough that it's not a 90 gig state database or a 12 terabyte log file that they, at least in their initial testing with it and in their standard configs, that they have 1 gig database, and that's 3,600 seconds worth of transaction history.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable, I guess. What's the default?
I'd have to look. That's what I don't know what the default is on it. It doesn't turn on unless you set the size of the minimum or the maximum of the database or whatever. That's what turns that API on. And then you've got a lot of optional settings that, and apparently the default is not 1 hour because they set it to 1 hour. So 1 gig was enough. So it wasn't crazy. And I was like, that's like account query DB. All right, fine. Just throw it out there.
Okay. Well, if it's something that's going to be used and it's something that the WAX network needs us to do, we just need to know specifically which features need to be enabled and for how long. Obviously, within reason, not a month's worth of transactions. and we just make that something that's measured against.
Above and beyond, you can definitely do a month's worth of
185 months.
Go Sweden.
We can definitely elaborate on a recommendation, but I'm sure we will need your input to have a nice configuration that works along for everyone. And
I I would encourage anybody on VPs, anybody that might have some settings or opinions or whatever. I've tried to kind of go out, ask and find. I've hit up Kevin to try to figure out, how exactly are these meant to work. But I've been for all chains, not just Wax, just trying to figure out, what are some of the recommended settings? Why did you set it to that? I don't have to blindly accept it, but there's things I didn't even really. I haven't even tried the whole block producer specific peering feature that came out in 4.0 or whatever that says,
Yeah.
I know the next BP and dynamically changing the peers to try to keep up with them. But in all fairness, that's another one that if we're going to provide standard recommendations, kind of got to understand it.
I think especially the peering topic has been discussed in the Antelope node operators roundtables in the past weeks. Maybe someone can sum up what the findings was on this one.
Well, there's several different aspects of it, but this was the new feature that I'm talking about was the result of many of those conversations about how BPs are constantly needing to stay in sync with the next BP in rotation, but it changes, and it's all over the place. So I'm not thrilled with the feature as it is right now. It's still a little funky and whatnot, but it's designed to try to figure out who's the next BP in the schedule. And if you have a P2P tag for that BP, it would go to use that one as it needs to. But like I say, that would be something that you would really need to explain and offer, but somebody's got to figure it out and then.
Well, I mean, that's a operational setting, whereas this API action feature is a feature that the users might use, which is kind of different, I
Depends
guess.
on how you look at it. If you're trying to standardize the block producer experience between us all, like for instance, I think that we should recommend some subjective billing features. I think that we should explain them and let people know what they're doing.
Yeah.
But if we don't tell the VPs that you need to go in and these are good starting points and this is what they do, that you're going to have them until they get called out on the carpet in the channel that says, hey man, what's up?
But it's also like, when you're listening to music on your hi-fi and you've got this sound deck, you don't just go freaking turning all the knobs and making things. It's not going to make it sound better, right? Everything needs to be purposeful. We are making this change specifically because we want to make this difference, this specific change.
Coming up with
you could have a megabyte config.inr if you had to turn everything on. There's a lot of stuff in there, man.
I know, but and that's why I say you need to provide that general list. And I know me and some other VPs differ on that, and their points are valid. If you get a list, you just copy and paste, and you don't know what you're doing. But if you don't get the list, even if you're trying, you're still failing.
This is especially important because we have a growing number of standby producers, and with this we have more people that might cycle in at a later point, and if they then don't have the settings, we don't really need the standby in the first place if he just crashes or ends up having empty blocks or empty rounds because it does not have the proper subjective billing settings or whatever.
Yeah, but also if they are a random standby and they just copy paste the config, they don't follow the development, and they have some old settings that were valid when that guide and settings were put together, because that's when they copy pasted it, and then they won't change it because it works. And then after a year or 2 years of being standby and coming in, and then they need new settings, it's the same problem. So we are giving them a config that will die over time, and they don't need to understand what they are doing.
We shouldn't give a config. We should just give recommendations for specific settings, and then we can update these recommendations as we go. But some things should just be recommended as a minimum, essentially.
Oh,
for
yeah,
example,
like those transactions thing
and
chain API and get accounts and things like that. That makes sense.
And definitely from the API side. So it's really been two sides for me that I've been kind of looking at. Number one is, as a public API producer, we want to provide the best solution we can. What are all the settings I need to turn on to where it's usable? Secondly, is this debacle that we're constantly fighting of being a BP and transactions and subjective billing and peer configurations. I mean, we got a good group of folks as is now, but as new folks come in, they don't have the history. They're not as immersed in the weekly node table discussions to create these features that are coming out. You know, I mean, and you know, I've seen it on many other chains. The same apathy is that here's the config, let it go. I do think if the OIG makes a constant push with collaboration of the BPs, obviously, to maintain a config, and as 5.0 comes out, update it and make a push to, I mean, if we can validate it or not, at least don't let the config go stale. Because in my opinion, you need to help them. If we don't help people, you're gonna get a substandard experience, and they don't even know that they're not doing it right until they're called out.
But I think that a sysadmin that runs a validator should read the update notes of the software they are running and getting paid for. And by reading that update notes, they should be on top of this. They might miss something. They might not be aware of why they should use a setting. And that's where some discussions comes. But like, it's part of the job. They should be on top of. If you are responsible to operate one software, you should be aware of what is happening with that software. And if you do not, then you should probably not have the position anyway. I mean, if you don't read it the first day, fine, but hey, there's a new update, you should read what they have added and what you should tweak. It should not be something that you just copy paste based on what the recommendation is from other people.
On some fundamental level, but the way release notes, and I mean, there are people that are jumping from 3.1.4 to 4.04, and there have been probably 10 releases with some major features, new requirements, new this, that, and the other. And I've even pinged the ENF to say, look, can you give us node upgrade, the node operators, almost like a matrix that at least allows us to better get a bearing? Because I read the release notes. I was in almost every one of those meetings that made those features.
And the features are still a surprise.
And I totally forgot about it until Matthew pinged me and says, why the hell don't you return transaction status? Oh shit, I forgot to turn it on that API node, you know? So that's why I say, and that's why I've started this bigger push since then, about 2 months ago, to damn, if I forgot about it, expecting them to do it is setting us all up for failure.
Honestly, guys, like in my opinion, Anders is not wrong. Okay, I think we need a balance, because realistically speaking, I will never know as much as you know, Ross or Michael. I just won't, because me and the team, we're not on the jungle as active as those guys, and or aware of Antelope changes as much. So people have strengths and weaknesses. Different guilds have strengths and weaknesses. So I think a balance. But I also agree with Anders that you shouldn't copy paste and not care what you're doing. And okay, thank you, and AFK about it. Like in my personal situation last week, when I had issues with empty blocks, I pinged Matthew Darwin, or he pinged me or whatever, and I know he knows everything inside out. I'll never reach his level, and he gave me some recommended, and I tried them, and that's why I proposed those. And you know what? A lot of guilds DM me, and I'm not gonna say no to recommended settings. I gave it to them, right? They asked for it, and I gave it to them. I'm not gonna say no, right? So, but I agree. There's a balance there somewhere. You need to care, but like Michael said, I don't think we can be as at that level of detail.
And Include Null had a good point. The update nodes of Antelope is not pushed for the wax releases. That's not good.
That's indeed a good point. I wish we could bring some educational format to it, testing those configs, those settings, and talking about them and getting educated on those. if we can manage to do that, that would be fantastic.
Well, like I say, I've kind of personally, because I've had to upgrade 150 of them, have kind of nailed down in either it being a problem, me seeing an ENF, me finding the default configs out there, trying to kind of piece together. This is the chunk that I'm trying to standardize, plus, you know, some of the other stuff, but just trying to come up with a list of it all and
Because
gather it from other people. You know, what do other
Yeah.
people think?
even the bleeding edge leap on EOS that's being deployed, the configuration isn't, all the new features, sorry, aren't as well known. You know, we all need to get better feedback. We should probably bring it up in the meeting tomorrow night or tonight. Just to remind everybody. Yeah, well, it's 1 o'clock in the morning here, so it's today. We should probably bring it up with them about educating on the recommended.
I've brought that
settings
up many a times, and like I said, the best.
Well, I'll bring it up.
Was kind of a matrix to where you could, if you, because all these release notes are ding, 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 and then you had some that went in 3 and some that went in 4, and but if you could just say, I'm going from 314 to 404, tell me what features are different, right? I mean, and even recommendations that what the default is may not be adequate. Fine, don't provide a default answer, but like we all know, the default last block transaction, right? We force everybody to make sure that your blocks are going out early, but that's just something we tell everybody, right?
The call is ending soon. Should we move forward or?
Yeah.
I'll bother you guys with collecting some default configuration over the next days. Maybe we can get it completed in the next 2 weeks, but definitely something we should look into.
The call is soon ending, the hour limit. Should we move into another topic or are we done?
Do you guys want to go on, or?
I have a 1 o'clock. I've actually got to go get set up, but.
Okay, I'm posting the next link in here. The meetings were supposed to be 60 minutes, but I think we'll extend them to 90 minutes for the future. And I'm also posting the link to the next one here. If you want to join, do it now. See you in the next call.
All right. Cheers, everyone.